Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I'm going to talk about intelligence today. As this subject has come up, I have been shown a video, which I will do an introduction to in a moment, and then I'm going to read a poem on FBI for peace. I have had surveillance by the FBI and still, I would believe, have surveillance. How do I know this? Years ago, after I finished peace studies at La Trobe University, I did a peace program on radio called Bridges to Peace. I never regarded myself as a peace activist because I wasn't involved in the community at all. If anything, I was just a person who was inspired by peace. I actually dreamed I was teaching peace in 1998, which sort of changed my life as I moved out of what was a market research background. I'm trained in economics, to a complete shift toward peace. I started to move towards what I would regard as the feminine, which is in both men and women. But the feminine's more receptive, sensitive, empathetic, more in touch with the emotional intelligence. So my life has made some very massive shifts. And I've had a lot of experience. I've been a Rotary Peace Fellow. I've travelled the world as a peace clown. I've written many, many books now, which you can see on my website, which is www.worldpeacefull.com. I have met whistleblowers. Scott Ritter, the Senior Weapons Inspector in Iraq, was one I met with. And in actual fact, we didn't talk about Iraq, we talked about peace, education. I've also met Douglas Rockey, Major Douglas Rockey, who's from the Pentagon. He was my first interviewee as I dual-panelled in a community radio station, interviewing him about the depleted uranium that was spread all over Iraq and the Balkans and many other places. He was the Pentagon's expert in depleted uranium. He has a huge CV. For those who are interested in following up my life's work, you're welcome to look and download my PDF, which is A Fool for Peace. That has the transcripts in there. So intelligence is not just, for me, some area to explore out of interest. It's because my life was directly impacted, given I had surveillance. Now, that surveillance, I found out, was after I aired and broadcast Scott Ritter's testimonial about what he called the illegal war of aggression in Iraq. And he had a very really strong critique about my own government as well in there. And what he felt was a mission that was not about de-escalating WMDs or weapons of mass destruction. He saw it as name change, which is a form of regime change. And that's another area of inquiry that the public, I would advise to have a look into, is this trend of changing these regimes because they're not in alignment with various policies. So he was an eye-opener for me. I knew nothing about intelligence work. Sitting with him was an experience. I've also had FBI come onto my friend's phone last year, given my own speaking out in respect of conscientious objection to what I see as rotting in the job provider system and the ineffective nature of it. When I spoke out, I just did it because I believed in speaking the truth. There was no agenda behind it. But I found myself ignored and I found the problem unresolved. And in fact, in other disputation I've had, the same pattern was there, where you are largely ignored. They don't enter into any form of conflict resolution. There seems to be this wall that you can confront when you bring up what would be called inconvenient truths that others do not want to deal with. They just want you to go away. So they use all sorts of methods to do that. I have studied a bit of counterterrorism when I was a Rotary Peace Fellow. I've met intelligence officers even on that program. So I'm aware that there are tactics and methodologies that are used in order to silence people, to frighten people, to intimidate, which is all in the realm of bullying people. So we're talking about a very fear-based culture. It's very toxic. It's very much about the projection of power. It's not about peace. It's not about democracy. These are patterns of behaviours that have been played out for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. So as a peacemaker myself, I'm not in the business of simply according blame. I'm more interested in the truth of matters. I'm interested in freedom of speech because I think it's absolutely essential that people have the freedom to whistleblow if they think something is corrupt or wrong or undermining the very democracy they see themselves living in. If it's undemocratic, it needs to be raised, because to not raise these issues is a form of consent. It's an implied consent, and that is, in a sense, a false indicator to those in power. And I think, there's a saying that I remember reading, which was about the tyrant. It's actually out of the love for the tyrant that you stop a behaviour that you consider to be harmful. Now, most people wouldn't love the tyrant, but because I'm in the peace area and because I am a loving person, I actually do love everybody. I have an unconditional way of loving. So I don't really like to jump on the bandwagons of condemnation. I like to solve the problem, because what I'm looking forward to is a society that's based on values, respect, democracy, a society that's in balance with the planet. So we're not destroying the environment or being distracted by these endless wars that are never resolved. We have a limit situation, most definitely, at this time. My speaking up is because I feel an internal urgency to have the courage to say what I feel is my perspective, my truth from my angle. And as a peacemaker, I have a duty of care to raise issues. The first thing I want to talk about before I get to my poem is I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. I saw a little bit of the video about a whistleblower in the United States who I think is a significant one. Her name is Susan Lindauer, and that's Lindauer. She is former CIA. She would be considered an asset. She was very much involved in the negotiations between the Iraqis and the US government. She knew all communications, and she's come out as a whistleblower, indicating that 9/11, the issue of the planes going into buildings, was known in the intelligence community, was known at the highest levels, and what she expected as an outcome didn't happen. And instead, she became persecuted as a result of speaking the truth. And this is why it's extremely important that whistleblowers are not somehow marginalised or put to the side or disappeared or criminalised by those who may well be hiding criminal activity. And I'm a great believer of equality before the law for all, because if that system of law breaks down, if it's a law for some and not for others, if others can slip out of situations where they have engaged in criminal activity that's harmed others, I absolutely think they need to be held to account. By not holding them to account, it sends a green light that corruption is permissible. If you want stability, if you want cohesion within a society, if you want respect for those in authority, you absolutely have to have a clean system of justice that's not appointed on the basis of political lines of influence. Those judges must be neutral and they must have experience. They must be able to, in that judicial capacity, weigh the intellect with the emotional intelligence to be able to read for the truth in any matter. As I've said in poetry I've written, the scales of justice as a symbol with a woman holding them, blind to prejudice. And she's got the blindfold on, holding the scales in balance. It's not a mistake that a woman is holding these scales, because typically women do speak up and say the truth. It's because we're in line with our emotions and we feel strong sense of conscience. For those who've been trained out of believing it's a weakness, they've been told to be professional, to detach from their emotions, they tend to be the easiest ones to manipulate in order to remain silent. And then we get these collusionary groups of silence. Then that lie is hidden. This conspiracy can grow bigger as others see that they got away with it. And that important levy of standards, of ethics, of integrity is lost. Typically if you look into the family structure, the parent models the behaviour for the child to follow. Now, if that parent is deceptive, is not a truth teller, then the child's going to pick up that behaviour and they'll copy it. They'll emulate it. The same applies in a company or any sort of hierarchy. Those at the top are the ones that set the level of standards. If for them they see it as pragmatic, as a means to an ends, that the ends matters, not the means, then they can easily move into a space of ruthlessness, of no holds barred, circumventing Geneva Conventions, ignoring international law, legislating for laws that are going to favour them so that they can't be critiqued, so that these lies can't be exposed. And that's where the real fear rests with whistleblowers. Those who have done the wrong thing, absolutely terrified of being discovered. But the truth of the matter is, if they're not discovered and these lies are allowed to continue, or these crimes that impact other human beings, if they're allowed to continue, then we see ourselves spiralling toward the bottom. That is not the world that I envisage. So as my own duty of care, I speak up as well. So what I thought I'd do is just read a couple of sections out of a PDF I pulled down on Susan Lindauer. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I saw a bit of the clip about her, and I'll actually apply that link to this video because I think she's significant. Her book is called Extreme Prejudice. So that image of the woman with the blindfold and the scales, I felt linked to this title of this book she's written. Now, this section I'm reading is from Dick Atlee, and it was written on the 30th of May 2013. It's a review of certain sections out of her book, but I'm just going to read a few paragraphs just to give you a bit of insight. Then I'm going to read my poem. I haven't read the whole article here. I'm just going with my intuition. Extreme prejudice is a military intelligence term, refers to a person marked for destruction. A usage not inappropriate here. Susan Lindauer, the second cousin and eventual victim of George W. Bush's Chief of Staff, Andrew Card, and it's got in brackets and others, is an anti-war and anti-Iraq sanctions activist. But she was also the backdoor intelligence asset for the US government under handlers from the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency for communication with the Libyan government regarding the Lockerbie plane bombing, in brackets, they didn't do it, Dick is saying, and with the Iraqi government in the year prior to 9/11 and in the lead up to the Iraq War. She had come to the intelligence community's attention for having earlier passed on a warning unheeded about the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Throughout 2001, she personally communicated to the Bush administration a series of increasingly specific and frantic intelligence warnings about an impending attack in New York City involving hijacked airplanes and the World Trade Center. She was also the backdoor negotiator with the Iraqi regime over WMDs, which is weapons of mass destruction, and had managed to obtain Iraq agreement with all US demands, only to have that agreement ignored and suppressed by the administration intent on war. Angered by the administration's and Republicans' leadership subsequent attempts to blame 9/11 and the eventual Iraq quagmire on the failure of the intelligence community to provide adequate intelligence, she went to Congress to lay out what she knew, and she was promptly arrested, accused of being an Iraqi spy, and eventually sent to prison for psychiatric evaluation and an attempt at stereotypically Stalinist forced drugging. I find that very concerning. So Extreme Prejudice is the story of the events involved in the role she played prior to her arrest and the ghastly Kafka-esque story of the years of torment that followed, orchestrated by the Patriot Act and the judicial system corruption and fraud it has facilitated. The book is a wake-up warning call to Americans about the act and the destruction of our basic freedoms it represents. It's also a warning to Australians. It's a warning right across the world, actually. I also, as I said earlier, I met with Scott Ritter, the senior weapons inspector in Iraq. So he was the former inspector at the time when I met him. And that was just by sheer fluke. I just happened to talk with a guy at the university who was bringing him to the University of Melbourne. And I was on community radio, and I considered it in the public interest to go to this lecture. It was the most explosive lecture I've ever attended. He's a very articulate speaker. But it was very shocking too, because he was raising issues that he was the one sent in to check on these weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he came to the conclusion that he'd been sent on all these furphies that were not real weapons inspections. What he said was that, similar to Susan, that the Iraqis were very cooperative in actual fact. The only issue he said there was sensitivity was around the palace because they were protecting Saddam Hussein. So his argument was that these were illegal wars of aggression created by the US. Now, these truths have to come out because our world is not at peace. We're diverting the sum of $1 trillion per year is going into militarism, and the argument is terrorism. But the thing is, we're at a point where we don't know who's telling what. We don't know what's true, what's not. Increasingly, whistleblowers are coming out and revealing that there are conspiracies going on here at the highest levels, and it's not hard to work out that the oil is driving. So industry's fusion with government, in my view, is the key to look at here. When I studied economics myself, we looked at business-government relations. This is a very tenuous nexus because businesses often give donations to government. We see associations being set up where they are mingling, they're getting to know one another. We've also got the issue of lobbyists who know the ministers very well. And then we have these revolving door situations happening where people are accessing these high office through either safe seats or someone's resigning and they're accessing office. And then their interests become what is promulgated through their activities whilst in office. If they are corrupt people, then they are going to be open to other interests, not the public interest. If they're not wise people, then they will just go with what advantages them. And we end up in situations where good governance is not happening, where innocent people can go to jail, where legislation gets created that benefits a certain group who have influence, rather than a balanced decision-making where the whole is being benefited. So I'm going to read this poem. I haven't read it for years now. I wrote this in 2011. But because I live and work a lot with inspiration, I trust my inner feeling. So when I'm speaking to these matters, I'm actually coming from an inner feeling as well, which is my contribution to freedom of speech, because I believe these issues must be placed on the table. I believe in transparency, which many people advocate is extremely important in government. I believe in truthfulness. I believe in democratic freedoms, which I would agree we are in danger of losing if we don't all start to speak up. So perhaps this message goes to all those who are thinking more deeply about democracy and what's to be lost here. I would encourage everyone to speak up. If you know of any sort of criminal activity, then you've got to speak up. I also recognise, having said that there are also problems in being heard, as I myself have not been heard, and I have seen processes not working appropriately, which has raised for me issues of corruption, which is why I'm speaking out. So this poem I'm going to read to you is called FBI for Peace. And I'll just read my very brief intro to it. I felt inspired to write this with love and in truth. We are one planet and one species. It is time for all of us to work together. We are all on the same side. And I want all of you to hear this. I am talking to the intelligence community too, who I've sat in a room with. We are all on the same side. Because ultimately, if we head down the trajectory we're heading, there will not be a future for the children, whom they are the ones I work for. This is a spiral down. If we continue to allow corruption to prevail, you cannot do it. Integrity is essential, and I'm not interested in those who give lip service to the word integrity commission, who seek to be associated with that. I'm interested in those who actually are going to live the integrity and be true leaders. And they can be public servants, they can be people in ordinary occupations, as they would call it. I don't really like the word ordinary because I see extraordinary people everywhere. Truth does matter. So to my poem, FBI for Peace. The future benefit of intelligence will view the world through the prism of the peacemaker, as it dawns on those analysing events that security is about service, that the many colours can come together under a new enlightenment in alignment, to no longer think in lines and columns of old paradigms that end the game, but to play the world peace game, inviting you to play with new possibilities, transforming national interest into resolving real conflicts within, rather than revolving door conflicts of wars without end. To benefit the few at the expense of the many is not in the majority's interests. The wise know that what you resist persists and what you look at disappears, and this means simply seeing things as they are without projection. For some see the cup and others see the cap. The cup is not real. Building profiles from fragmented jigsaw pieces made to fit distorts the real image of the big picture. For the real profile of the world is the smiling human face at peace. Sadly, at present, this is a race to the bottom, a system collapse. risking the global security of billions from a syntax era of judgment. For it is the wake-up call for governance that sets off real alarm bells. As nature speaks, are you listening? Buckminster Fuller sees the world as one. He sees the disparate governments pulling in all directions, wasting energy. As tied donkeys that compete rather than cooperate to share food. To find in the end the needle in the haystack is the keyhole of wisdom. When one looks to see a Pandora's box as a Rubik's Cube of a billion combinations, each combination seeks for harmony when the patterns match. It is time to pull the threads together to strengthen the real social fabric inherent within the tapestry of humanity. Yet to win is to move as one species in the same direction. From chaos to a unified field theory, stepping out of the boxes and into the compartments of peace, rather than falling to pieces, forming bridges of understanding over troubled waters. For the I Ching is a hexagram of 3 moving lines and 3 broken lines. For only working together can we cross the great stream, as the bridge of peace is balance found not by chance. Always the wise meeting in the middle, as they see your interests as their own. For the middle is to share the earth equally. For no one is greater or lesser than anyone else. To negotiate with the spirit of life, liberty and happiness for our children. For these are the founding fathers and mothers that value parenthood. Unified fields of flowers without theory opens to the emotions as intelligence integration. Destructive wars are not intelligent. Motherhood statements see into the future of children. Feeling for the future with compassion and intuition is to see your children when you come home. For it is the children whom we are all working for, and they depend on you to feed and love them with balance. Yet what happens when the topsoil blows off across the ocean? When the ice cap melts and the sea levels rise in high motions? When the poles reverse and the axis shifts? Did we interpret the hieroglyphs of disappeared civilizations? For they left codes for you to understand, not break. To understand real security is a higher intelligence that loves. For this is indeed a global emergency as the challenge looks upon the earth from a new perspective. Instead of warring parties, there is a misunderstanding moving from parity. Instead of those with us or against us, we see clarity. For there are wise solutions, and the first step, peaceful resolution. For this is the win-win that does not force, that rise above suppression to full expression of the diversity of non-violence. We are each other's brothers and sisters, and it is indeed one family when the fighting stops. And we see we need each other when the economic averages drop. For diversity is like changing seasons, as contrasts show us to ourselves as if a mirror, to find what is warm, what is cold, for the climate has definitely changed. And the real wealth of humanity always yields positive futures. We are here 1 minute to midnight. In an epiphany, we all see the blue planet as the miracle of one life. a blueprint of life forms 4 billion years in the evolving, expanding horizons to help us see sanity in unity, extending peace treaties further than self-interest. The natural world is an intelligent life, well informed. It is not base metals, minerals, and simple biological compounds. It is a living system of perennial blooms so profound that respond and react to salient signals you cannot see. A modus operandi of homeostasis, seeking equilibrium as the middle path, which moves in harmony until 0 point, as all parts communicate with the whole. And the whole is not run without command and control. It is intelligent life that is the sacred balance, a holistic geometric system of interrelationships, exchanges, and biofeedback loops of intel information. Each part of the system serves the other unconditionally. For the foundation tree of life is not in competition. It is cooperating in a harmonic convergence in all matters. And the competition between wildlife is merely territorial boundaries to ensure balanced food supplies in a world without war. In truth, diversity is not competing interests. Balance symbolises the justice in liberty, meeting in the middle to give abundance to all, as the web of life recycles all litter as energy. And this is the free energy that is a global common. Microbiology breaks down to build up. All life is genetically modified by natural selection. That has no need to maximise profit when the profits know only balance. So when you are working late at night, you are overtired. To find no brief is short, as human life is a complicated portfolio. Know there is another way to see the trees, not the wood. To close your eyes and feel the breath you did not buy on credit. When you look at the body that is not man-made, when you see your fingers on the keyboard that dance as they type, to wriggle your toes and move your legs, the feeling is coming back. This is when you know you are part of life on earth. And the earth knows you. Remember, you are precious and valued. You are unique and a one-off snowflake. Each moment is a treasure chest of possibilities. For the future is calling each of us to respond, to benefit from our natural intelligence rather than grey matters, to put our intelligence to good use, to be used by those who are good. For we are moving from intelligence gathering to wisdom circles. And this is the mustard seed that moves mountains. As we become clear about the molehills, for the earth is changing. The deck chairs are rearranging to find the Titanic need not become a carbon sink. As we rethink our common future is in your highest interests. And that's a poem I wrote 8 years ago now. It's still relevant today. So with that, I'm going to finish and just simply say that this poem and my musings are dedicated to the intelligence community, who recently I sat amongst in Canberra at a Senate inquiry into intelligence and the free press, freedom of speech. We have to transcend these scripted narratives that maintain secrecy. We have to create environments where people speak up, and they have a duty to speak up if corruption is evident. We must come around whistleblowers and protect them. I heard Scott Morrison talking about the protection of an Australian citizen in China, and I immediately thought of Julian Assange. He is also an Australian citizen who was bringing out corruption. And I would agree with him in that this is a citizen. It's got nothing to do with other matters. It is simply supporting people, which is the role of the government to support its citizens. We are all on the same page when you start to think about your own children and their future. We are all brothers and sisters. That is the mastery when you get that, not just in a tight community, but when you start to see it as the world as your family. That is when you start to understand peace. We can no longer continue with these constant conflicts over resources and markets to benefit special interests when our ecological system is collapsing. And that collapse is not unrelated to our inner turmoil, because we do not resolve conflict. What we typically do is suppress it. We destroy anyone that we think is a threat to us, rather than manifesting a better type of conflict de-escalation, conflict resolution, mitigation, conflict mitigation, in order to not just mouth the words of peace, but actually learn what peace really means and how we can proactively support those who are seeing ways to avoid war. And certainly Susan talks about that in her video, that she could see a non-violent pathway with Iraq, but that was ignored because there was an intention for war. That has been made very clear by whistleblowers. And those who want to see a future that continues have to get serious about peace. It's not an idealistic notion. It is a holistic way of being when one is fully integrated in their values and intellect, seeing the other as family, as I said before. These are not lofty notions. These are ways of seeing, and this is what brings a holistic nature to solving problems, because what you do to another returns to the self. What you resist persists. What you look at disappears. Often I say in my videos, I am you. I have no enemy. Because the moment I see the log in your eye, I haven't taken the log out of my own. And we're seeing more and more people who are subscribing to what they would say are higher views from a spiritual perspective, but they're not living or walking the talk of what they say they believe in. So this is also a message to those of you who are putting yourselves forward in a way that suggests that you have values, integrity, and compassion, but not acting it out. People can see this. So this video is definitely dedicated to the intelligence community, that may they find peace, and may they, in the public interest, bring out information if they believe that something is corrupt. It's an absolute duty that they speak up, but they must be supported in that speaking up. That's absolutely critical, and that's serving humanity. So with that, thank you for listening. I'm sitting in my car here doing this. It's a bit awkward. I know it's jumped around a bit because I've been breathing. So I send everybody peace and love, transparency, and to speak up for democracy. Thank you.